The presenting sponsor for OnEducation is Classcraft. We're excited to announce Classcraft's new story mode, which makes it easy for educators to harness the power of stories. Episodes 1 and 2 of Season 1 are ready for you and your students to play today, and it's completely free. To learn more about Classcraft and the new story mode, simply visit classcraft.com/oneducation.
Say something a little bit more colorful that Mike would have filled in the blank there for us. Welcome to OnEducation, part of the Education Podcast Network. I'm Glen Irvin, and our special guest co-host is Andrew Arevalo. Friends, we have an awesome pod for you today. This week, we're going to break down what's going on between Apple and Google and what it means for our schools and especially our students. We will discuss the importance of incorporating the Sustainable Development Goals into our curriculum. And our guest this week is educator and author Michele Haiken. So welcome to the show, Drew. Thank you for agreeing to co-host today with me.
Hey, thank you. I am just honored, and completely humbled to, take in be part of this for today, and hopefully I do this justice, right? And hopefully when Mike hears it, he's like, all right, Game Boy Drew killed it. And not like killed it like as in the negative way. But anyways.
Yeah. So Mike is off traveling to China actually for work.
Wow.
And so I was just thinking about this, Drew. What are some of those bucket list destinations for travel? I know just recently, in your recent past, you've been able to travel, for example, to New York City, and I've actually never been there. And so what are some of those places where you're like, I definitely want to go visit there sometime in my life?
Yeah, exactly. So actually, it's funny that you just asked me this, because I'd say maybe a few months ago, Stephanie and I were having this conversation. By the way, Stephanie's my fiance, for those that don't know.
Yeah.
And we were having this conversation of what our summer would be looking like, right? In terms of, were we going to go and attend conferences?
Yeah.
Were we going to go and travel? And so we actually made the decision for me to not submit any sessions for ISTE or any type of conference, like, big conference that, so in essence, what we said was we would forego any educational conferences, and we would hence use the money that we would have spent, right, to go and travel to South Korea and to go to Tokyo.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
So that's where we are hopefully, going to be attending this summer, and we just got to get everything planned. But I know Stephanie's already looking up the prices, and the really cool thing about South Korea specifically is that, prior to being in the classroom, so I had like my own independent tutoring business, right?
Yeah.
And I was able to get in with the Korean population within my community, and most of my clients were Korean, right? And it's kind of odd the way that it works, but they would come here and live in our community for roughly anywhere from 2 to 4 years, because how we're on the border, right, with Mexico.
Yeah.
So if I'm not mistaken, there's an algae factory right across the border in Mexico, in Mexicali. So they would come here, and it was like part of their assignment, right, where they could choose to go. But they, in essence, they had to travel, though. They had to go and leave South Korea for like X amount of time. And so when they came here, they typically would live like in the El Centro community, and then they just commute to Mexicali. So they'd want to learn English, right? So they could,
of course,
adapt and
nice.
be included. And I was able to meet a lot of great individuals. And since then, many of them have gone back. And so I'm hoping to actually visit them, because I've stayed in contact with them.
That is so awesome.
Yeah.
And so interesting, because I would never suspect that
right.
This is a part of the community there in El Centro, in the Imperial Valley. So I was thinking about, I've traveled to Central America several times, and of course my family lived in Mexico, so we were there quite often. But I've never been to Europe.
Okay.
So places like Spain and just just really just traveling throughout Europe.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
It would be amazing. Just the experience of actually being around that architecture and history, et cetera, and those kinds of things. I think that would be amazing. And the food.
Oh yeah, definitely. So, hey, so since you mentioned Spain, right?
Yeah.
So I always joke with my students because they ask me about my last name, Arevalo. And actually, within Spain, I've researched it, but there's like this small province, and there's actually like an Arevalo city.
Oh, that's awesome.
And the really crazy thing about this is that there's a castle there.
Oh, and is
so
it
I joke
called
with my
Castillo?
students yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that I come from like this lineage of like kings and
my castle is awaiting me.
Yeah, exactly.
My return.
So I've always told them that I definitely like to go and actually visit Arevalo one day. That'd be pretty neat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is awesome. I love that. So I wanted to give our audience a quick update on the Impact Education Conference. And if you haven't already, get registered for that conference. It's just happening in a few weeks from now. We're also putting on a podcasting workshop, which we reference in the podcast often. And it's actually very reasonable as far as to be able to attend that pre-conference workshop. And no matter what, come by and just say hi. We have some giveaways, including things from Fidgets, one of our sponsors. So I was thinking about, Drew, what conferences, as people think about, the summer, we do this kind of pre-planning.
Yeah.
Should people, kind of invest, because it's an investment of money, no matter what,
absolutely.
Whether it's the district funds or we have to pay for it, somebody's going to have to spend some money. So what are those conferences that our viewers or our listeners, should be attending? We have FETC coming up in January.
Woohoo, Miami.
Yes. And then we have this summer, of course, the ISTE conference is humongous, those kinds of things. And I also was thinking about Q and it's all of its affiliates there on the West Coast and throughout the, Nevada, I think you were talking about. But which ones do you think it's like, okay, this is well worth that money?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So, in addition to the ones that you've mentioned, I mean, I had like my big moment was attending Spring Q 2 years ago, right? So that was before Game Boy Drew, before any of that. And it was like my world into, like my view, I should say, into this new world of, like connected educators and things like that. So it's on the West Coast. It has a huge presence here. And we are, Q is the ISTE affiliate over here, right? So definitely I'm getting excited for that one. That's in March. And the really cool thing about that one this year is that it actually lands on my birthday. Right, so opening day is my birthday. So I'm like, you guys are coming to my birthday, right? So,
that's awesome! My birthday at Q.
Yeah, exactly, right. So I'm getting excited for that, and then obviously FETC, like you mentioned, in Miami in January. That one for me, my first time attending was last year as well. Yeah, and it was kind of scary simply because it was my first time traveling to the East Coast and kind of like getting out of the Q organization, because I'm so involved in our local, I'm on the local Q affiliate board, and that's kind of been my exposure. But I was like, I kind of want to see what the East Coast is doing or what different organizations are doing. And so I went to FETC last year and I absolutely fell in love. Believe it or not, but that's actually where I met Mike. I'd never even heard of Mike before FETC. Yeah, that was pretty neat, and I'm pretty amped for that. So, and the last one that I would mention too, I mean, you mentioned ISTE, but there is a new one that started last year. It had like its inauguration last year, and it's actually in San Diego, and it's Ed Innovate Live.
I love that.
And it's it's actually put on through the University of San Diego, and the executive director there is Lisa Dolly. I don't know if you know her, Mike. Glenn?
Yeah. I've actually, I know her through Twitter, but not through anything else. Okay. So she's associated with it. That's awesome.
I feel like you guys would just, connect so well. And too, she's into gaming and things like that. So she's just like part of the pack, like naturally. And I absolutely love her. And so she put this one on right in addition to the University of San Diego. And I just definitely recommend It's this summer, and it's from August 2nd through the 4th. So I actually will be at that one for sure.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about, Drew, one time in December, we're going to have you up here in Minnesota, the most beautiful time of year, for this Impact Education Conference. Because we gotta try to get you out here. It's actually happening. It's third week in December. So the temperature should, vary between, I don't know, minus something and minus something.
As you mentioned that, like right away, the image in my head was from A Christmas Story. You remember the little boy?
Oh yeah. Yes.
Imagine me just right there, like showing up at the place, like from the desert.
You're freezing to death, and
exactly.
we're telling you to not put your tongue on the pole.
No, that'd be awesome though, to actually be there one day. I mean, definitely one of my bucket list things to be out over there one day.
Awesome. So usually we talk different items that come up on Twitter. So this week, I actually wanted to talk about something that you posted just yesterday, I believe. So it's so powerful and I think important for all of us to go ahead and basically stand up for all kinds of things as educators. So often I felt that at the beginning of my career, I was actually told to just be quiet. Yeah. Like, just mind your own business, do your things in your classroom, don't ruffle any feathers, and then 30 years down the road, retire or whatever. That was kind of like the statement that I was, given. But let me read this tweet here. You said, Mr. Arevalo, my so-and-so told me not to trust Mexicans. I could have ignored it. I could have sidestepped it. But to not confront it is to tolerate it. And in my classroom, that simply isn't an option. So I thought it was super powerful because it's an important, I think, a learning moment, especially for, our students, to make sure that they're not just exposed to one thing or those kinds of things. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So they have these different perspectives. And then I knew someone basically responded and said, how did you handle it? And I'm glad you responded with this. And you said, I described my experience. And I think that's the key right there. I think that's what holds us all back. As far as not being able to basically get along, especially in the United States, is we don't want to listen, or we haven't been able to listen to the experience of the other side, whatever that other side may be. And you said, in people treating me differently because of my identity, I gave personal examples, which is so important, shared how they made you feel, and then told him that other individuals' views certainly that because that other person felt this way, they didn't have to be feel this way. And then, of course, you told them, and you know that I'm Mexican too. Yeah. And that's important. That happens, obviously, we've had these conversations before as far as race and identity and those kinds of things. So tell us more about that, because I think a lot of teachers are scared to say anything once these things come up. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Even actually just posting the tweet, I was like,
yes,
I don't know. Should I post a tweet? Should I share it? Should I, and I know that there's so many other individuals who are in this space, and fighting it and, talking about it and discussing it. But if you look at my feed, I typically don't say those types of things, right? And so I was like, no, why am I going to hold back? This was something that happened in my classroom. And if you know me, I basically, most of what I share is just the experiences and the things that happen in my classroom with my students. And I keep it real 100%. Right. Yes. So it was odd in the sense that it actually happened during a science lesson. And we were talking about, forces out of all things, right? Forces. And, one of my students mentioned, briefly, we were talking about accidents and forces behind it. And then he said that he was involved in an accident. Yeah. And because of that incident, that, ever since then, that his, someone that he, holds in really high regard, told him that comment. Right. Yes. And so I was like, oh, it kind of hit me. It felt like I was in the accident right there, especially
that you were involved.
Yeah. Like being the leader in the classroom and having all my students look at me like, wait, what's Mr. Arevalo going to say? What's he going to do? And I thought about it just for a couple of seconds. And I said, no, like, hey, let's confront this right now. If I don't address it, what are the what ifs, right? What can happen? And why wouldn't I use this moment to capitalize on it and turn it into like this beautiful learning experience for not just that student, but for those around? Because, my biggest thing is when a student hears these words, they can choose to, accept them as their own, or they can choose to fight it and not accept it. And if I'm setting the example for my students, then I'm hoping that my kids are internalizing what I'm saying, right? And then going out into the world and just understanding that they don't have to be that. That's not them. That doesn't have to be their narrative. And so
powerful.
Yeah, I mean, and I just spoke from my experience and talked about how in my life, based off of my identity, right, how individuals have made me feel. And I didn't share this example with him or my class, but I'll share this example with you. All right. So on my way back from New York, I sat next to another person of color, right, on the airplane. And we got to talking, and we found out that we were both educators, right? And we were just discussing. And then before I knew it, we were bonding, Glenn, and understanding one another based on those incidents, those racist incidents that we've faced in our life. And that's how we were empathizing with one another, me and this other individual. And I always remember, like, this one of the examples she shared was that she was at Disneyland as a little girl. She says she was, 9-10 years old, and she still remembers it to this date. And she talked about how she was with her family, and a little girl in front of her dropped her, stuffed animal. And so she ran to go pick it up and to give it to her. And the little girl and her parents turned around, and when they saw, that she was a person of color, they said that she could just keep it. She could just keep the stuffed animal.
Oh, God.
And she remembers how much she felt that, because, I mean, can you imagine? I was like, oh, my God, because she touched it, right? Because she tainted it. And so that's how me and this other individual were bonding. And it sucks that's the narrative that so many others face. And like I said, I didn't want my kids to be part of that. And if I could definitely use it as a teachable moment, then I'm going to.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing that you're talking about here is the ability for someone to get to hear the story, the other side of this coin or whatever it might be. And then to be able to kind of go, we're actually not that different. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about, is that too many times we try to find our differences between each other. And then often once you get to know somebody, you're like, why did I even have those things, those thoughts, those whatever might be. Definitely a super powerful moment, man. I commend you, number one, for putting that on there, but number two, that this is the type of message that your students actually get to hear and get to learn. Just basically get to, and you weren't preaching either, which is awesome. You were just giving them your side of the entire thing, and then letting them now make their own decision on whatever, which way they're going to move forward as far as in life. I think that's super powerful moment. So I was looking through some different articles, and we like to talk edtech around here. And there was this crazy, I think, article about Apple versus Google, basically. And Apple's head of marketing called the Chromebooks cheap testing tools.
Wow.
And then said that kids who use them in school won't succeed. Now, it's an interesting thing to say publicly, I understand the competition of the markets and those kinds of things. And if we look at realistically, and Mike and I have, the Chromebook and the different versions of it are basically a ginormous chunk of the edtech one-to-one market. Yeah. I think they're like in the 70% of the market. And so then all of the other Apple devices, let's say the iPads and anything else, we have MacBooks at our school, are probably only 10 to 15% of the entire marketplace, So it's an interesting thing for them to say.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when I heard, I mean, honestly, my initial reaction was like, wow, that's a very privileged comment to make.
Yes.
If you understood the dynamics of what actually happens in a school environment and who we're actually serving and understood budgets, I mean, wow. I was like, at my district, we're not one-to-one. And all we have right now is we have one Chromebook cart per grade level. And to give you an example of, the size of each grade level, we have anywhere from 4 to 5 to 6 teachers per grade level sharing one Chromebook cart. Exactly.
Yes.
So when I hear those types of comments, I'm like, wow, like, okay, like very coming from like a privileged background, obviously, because I mean, I can't tell you enough, like just when my students and I are exposed to like, these devices and the learning that can actually happen with these, because we have access to Chromebooks and not Macs, I couldn't even imagine. And that isn't to say that, that, Macs aren't great that they aren't great devices, right? It's just the fact that that's not our reality.
No.
Yeah.
and not the reality for tons of districts, right? Throughout the country, because I mean, obviously people are making the decision to purchase these Chromebooks because they are viable devices, number one, but number two, they are viable devices that are within the budgets. You can buy, one MacBook is $800, and a Chromebook, you could probably buy 4 Chromebooks, I mean, that's crazy to think of that. And then it's an equity piece, is like you just described. We can actually get more devices in the hands of more students with the amount of funds that we actually have as far as to be able to do that. Yeah. So I thought it was crazy that that would be especially by a marketing head, you know what I mean? It's never going to sit well.
I was going to say, it might be something, that he knows to be 100% true, like in his mind, but maybe just not, probably not say it publicly, right?
Yeah.
Where a bunch of people are going to be like, well, now, even if it is an awesome device, now I'm just not going to buy it just because you said that. You know what I mean?
Yes. No, totally. It turns you off. Because, I mean, in the end, I love Apple products. I mean, I love iPads. They're amazing. And you're right. We happen to be super privileged at the school district that I work in. We have MacBooks at 9 through 12. And then 3 through 8, we have 1-to-1 iPads. I mean, that's super rare.
Oh, yeah.
Though we want to, I think a lot of times we get into these, especially on Twitter, I think is the biggest place where everybody thinks that everybody's on the same playing field. You know what I mean? Like everybody is 1-to-1, number one. Yeah. You just said you're not. You're not. You have devices to be able to share. That everybody has the money to be able to afford these types of devices. And they choose to buy it. And I don't want to call it an inferior device because it's just a different device. Yeah, exactly. The Chromebook is different. It's different. Of course, it doesn't have all of the things that an iPad can do, and of course not a MacBook. But they're for different purposes. And the way that people use them is amazing. I think, as far as being able to expose kids to all kinds of things, and do all kinds of creative activities with them. So it's an interesting take. I hope that Apple doesn't continue down this path of basically.
Otherwise they're going to essentially alienate all their prospective customers and be like, well, I'm not going with them.
Forget you. Forget you guys. Exactly.
Except not saying forget you, but saying something else, right?
Saying something a little bit more colorful that Mike would have filled in the blank there for us. Yes. So everybody, when we come back, so actually thankful to have Drew here on the show to discuss the importance of embedding the sustainable development goals into our curriculum. So stay with us. OnEducation is brought to you by FreshGrade. Are you spending too much time stumbling between apps and duplicating work? Want to spend more time connecting with your students? FreshGrade Next has powerful new lesson planning tools that will give you the flexibility you need to focus on engaging and inspiring your students. FreshGrade Next is designed for teachers and made for learning. Integrated, simple, and powerful. To To learn more about FreshGrade Next and sign up for your free account, visit freshgrade.com. OnEducation is brought to you by Sourcewell Technology and the Impact Education Conference. Join Jimmy Casas, Angela Meiers, Michael Cohen, Jordan Shapiro, the OnEducation podcast team, amazing featured speakers, and thousands of educators December 14th through 17th in Minneapolis, Minnesota for the region's best education conference. Register now using promo code OnEducation2019 for $30 off your registration. Also, with every registration, you'll receive a free book of your choice from one of the amazing speakers. To register for the conference, visit impact.sourcewelltech.org. That's impact.sourcewelltech.org. So welcome back, everyone. So super excited actually to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals and really finding ways to connect them to our current situation, whatever curriculum we teach, whatever content or grade level we teach. And I know that this summer when we were talking to Dr. Jennifer Williams about the Sustainable Development Goals, we just didn't have enough time to go and dig deep, into any of these things. But Drew, you actually wrote an article called Learning Through STEMpathy. And it's a fantastic take on the Sustainable Development Goals and basically giving you specific examples. That's the part I really love about lessons that you've used and how they're interweaved and the way that you pull them all together to connect them to the Sustainable Development Goals and then push the kids so much further too. So first, why don't we go ahead and tell the audience, Drew, what are these Sustainable Development Goals and why are they important?
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, Jennifer Williams, she was the one that kind of got me started with all of this, actually. Once I attended her session last year at FETC, and that's where I was introduced to the goals. So essentially, the global goals, also known as the Sustainable Development Goals or the SDGs, they were adopted by the UN member states in 2015. As a measure to preserve Mother Earth and all of her inhabitants. So these goals target the most pressing issues that humanity collectively faces, such as inequality, climate change, poverty, etc. And, only through like this global effort of all the member states of the UN can we turn the shared vision into a reality, capable of extending life forward, right? And it does have I don't want to call it an expiration date, but it has a target date of 2030, where by this year, we are expected to, make all of these goals, turn them from a dream into a reality.
So Drew, a lot of your content that you're teaching has to do, or you're bringing in the concepts of STEM or STEAM. So how do we connect these Sustainable Development Goals that you just finished describing and then pull them into STEM and STEAM? Because I love the name of the post, Learning Through STEMpathy.
Absolutely, right. And the greater question is, well, why? Why do we do this, right?
Yes.
So I'm going to read the little segment from my actual article, right? And I do want to just give credit to Michelle Moore. She's the individual who actually, like I've seen use this term often, STEMpathy, right? and I remember the first time she used it, I was so intrigued by it. I was like, what is STEMpathy? Right? What actually is it? And why should it be included in the classroom? So anyways, I want my students to recognize how science, technology, engineering, and math intersect in meaningful ways to transform their world into a better place for everyone, right? And more than anything, I'd like for them to be at the forefront of enrichment by actually empowering them to use their hands, minds, and hearts to create with intention. And that means giving them opportunities to internalize the design thinking process so that empathy comes naturally. And that's kind of like one of the main things I'm doing in my classroom since being introduced to the goals, is understanding that there is a greater connection to be made in terms of actually linking what we're doing in terms of our learning, but more specifically to one of our goals. So in essence, I'm going to kind of talk about one lesson that I did last year. That was pretty life-changing, at least for my students. And basically what they had to do was, our ELA standard was, they had to research, a topic And then from there, they were going to have to actually write an essay, an informative essay, right? So I thought, well, how cool would it be to actually make it a little bit more meaningful and not just give them like this random topic, but actually,
of course,
what we did was I said, I want you to research, different disability, something that you've, heard of before, whether it's, someone you know of or just someone that or something that you want to know more about. So as I researched these different disabilities, the next part of this was actually what they were going to do was they were going to go back in time, and they selected a game console, right? And upon making that selection, what they had to do was they had to take the game control for that game console, and they had to make it adaptive to fit the specific needs of that disability that they researched and that they actually explored. So in doing this, I was able to foster in SDG number 10, which is all about reducing inequalities. And then within that goal, there's like micro targets, and I was able to actually focus specifically on promoting universal social inclusion and ensuring equal opportunities. So it was really neat just to see my students go through this whole process, right? Of, because they actually had to, and I haven't said it yet, but then they actually had to make the game control with cardboard. So, and I made them make it to scale. So, and it had to, be like legit, like this is how it would be if it could, and if we had made it. But more specifically, they had to justify, well, why would it look like that? Why would it have this big button, or why would it have this feature? But more, again, specifically to the disability of the individual with it, right? So, I had everything from Nintendo Switches being made to Xboxes to PlayStations, and everything was made through cardboard. And it was pretty cool because there was like that geometry part of my math standards that I was able to integrate. And that was really hard because...
And engineering too. I mean, and prototyping. It's all of the stuff like someone, in a lot of these big companies is all the skills that they want our students to have, and you're incorporating them all, and for a greater purpose too. That's the part that's like so powerful.
Yeah, that was one of the really neat things, is to actually go through the design thinking process with my kids as they were prototyping, right, what their control might look like and why it would look like that. So, and then the last part of this, I would say, is like just to blending in some lessons from teaching tolerance, where we actually got to explore what disabilities, what they actually were, right? And, just, again, making sure my students were developing that empathy component for others, and then actually creating solutions to help people who might be different.
So often, Drew, our teachers get overwhelmed when they hear these concepts. They're excited about them, but they don't know how to actually go ahead and apply them. And I would send them obviously to your blog to be able to read this and get some examples. But what are the resources? Where would you send them to?
I'd love to help. So I would definitely recommend starting with what's called the Table of Targets, the global goals. And it hopefully Glenn could actually get that resource linked in for anyone who's interested in learning more. But basically what this resource does is it breaks down the goals by these subcategories. And once you're able to actually see them in their full transparency, it makes it a little bit easier to actually plan with them and link those to, specific standards, right, that you actually have to teach. So two, I would just keep in mind that, the lesson that I mentioned right now sounded pretty complex or comprehensive, but we tackled it in stages, right? So we started started small, and then kind of after one phase of it was complete, then we extended it. So I wouldn't necessarily, go like full force on this. I would say start small, and then after, you feel a little bit more comfortable, then you can actually just add another layer and extend the lesson, right? So, but yeah, I think definitely go and check out the resource that should be linked down below, or awesome. Just
we'll make sure.
Message me and I can also help, right?
Perfect. Yes. And we'll go ahead and put it in the show notes for sure, that what the link to be able to get to this and any other types of things that you think we should go ahead and share, Drew, with our audience. And then I want to thank you, man, for being my co-host today. You rocked it. It's super awesome. And I think next week we're going to have a different co-host, and we'll see what, we'll surprise our audience with that. But thank you again, Drew, for joining us today.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me. And hopefully I didn't butcher this too much. And hopefully you guys don't lose a whole bunch of subscribers. Like, oh, Game Boy Drew, right? No, I'm joking. Hey, thanks for the opportunity. Of course. And I'm just very humbled, to be able to share through your awesome and amazing platform. So thank you guys.
Awesome. So everybody, when we come back, we'll be joined by Michele Haiken. So stay with us. OnEducation is brought to you by Fidgets. Fidgets are interactive USB sensors that support all major programming languages that make physical computing easy. Fidgets keep the emphasis on coding while increasing student engagement. And the best part is that you can get started for free right now. Simply go to bit.ly/fidgetsOnEducation to get your introductory kit that includes a free sensor worth over $50. That's bit.ly/fidgetsOnEducation. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. Our guest this week is an amazing educator and author who is passionate about promoting literacy in creative ways to improve student learning and understanding. Welcome to the podcast, Michele Haiken.
Thank you so much for having me, Glenn. Thank you.
I should have asked you how to pronounce your last name.
You're good. You're good.
Is that right?
I always say it rhymes with bacon. So
okay, Haiken. Okay, perfect. So Michele, for our audience members that maybe aren't familiar with you, could you tell them a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and then what you do?
Okay, definitely. So I have been teaching middle school English for the past 20 years. I currently live in Stamford, Connecticut, but I teach right across the border in Westchester, New York, which is about 35 minutes outside of New York City. In addition, I have been adjuncting as a literacy professor at a small college close in Westchester, and I have authored 3 books all about literacy.
Yes.
From reading, writing now, and gaming.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you remember me, but we actually met a few years back, and I was telling you I was going to tell you this, and you actually presented and keynoted at this one of my favorite conferences of all time. If anybody gets a chance to attend this, it's called the Games in Education Conference, and it happens in the Troy Albany area.
Yes.
Yes. And I remember specifically you speaking on the topic of everybody was about games-based learning, gamification, but I specifically remember you were talking about gamification and reading, which I found exciting. Everything that you were talking about, I was like, this actually applies to second language learning, or it applies to any content area. And I even purchased a book, and I'm going to show it to you right now.
Oh, the reader! I love it. I love it. I still, Tracy G, what a fabulous author. Yes. That whole concept of the book is, that was my story that propelled my gamification to the next level with that YA book. And you do know that there's 2 other parts to that story. Yeah. So
yes, and I was I listened to you, I wrote this down, and I just wanted you to know that you influenced me, and I bought that book. I read that book, and it is amazing. You were right. It's very unique in the way that it's presented, and what a great story. And then I could see how when you were speaking to us about incorporating books like this into your classroom, how well that meshed together. So you've actually written several books about the literacy and gamification, and your latest book is called New Realms for Writing. So what was the inspiration for this latest book?
Well, I think, literacy as an English teacher, we always focus on reading, writing, speaking, listening, those core foundational standards. But, that has the idea of what we believe as the text. Years ago, it was the print book. I cherish books, but, that text has changed and become so multimodal with podcasts podcasts and with visual media and digital media, that like, why relegate just reading books in our content area classrooms? You know, if we look at it as a text, we can approach it in so many different ways, and students can be reading and writing these multimodal texts. So I wanted to talk about the podcasting I do in my classroom, the visual literacy, the film design that my students do, as well as all different other projects where it's not focused on just poetry. It's like now I'm moving into like poetry and makerspace and robots versus like doing elevator pitches or having students script out and create their own podcasts to share their investigations and research about topics that they're passionate about.
So I'm going to paraphrase something you said or that you wrote somewhere. And it basically says that you should start projects by asking students like what they want to do to change the world. And I love that lead up.
Yes.
Like, for example, whether it's lead in drinking drinking water, in Michigan, or gun violence that's pertinent to our schools. It actually happens too often right now.
Yes.
And I was just thinking about that many times creativity, though, takes a back seat. I think especially my wife is an English language arts teacher in high school. Because of the pressure to have students perform, unfortunately, on these like high stakes summative assessments, where you feel you have to, teach to the book or the core or whatever it might be, whatever you want to do. But how have you been able to incorporate, even within those circumstances, still be innovative in your approach? Because you've talked about some of the things that you're doing as far as in your classroom. How do you balance those two things?
Sure. I mean, the first thing I have to say is I'm so thankful that I have a principal that supports me, and we could have engaging conversations and talking about multimodal text in our English classroom and, addressing 21st century skills and technology and helping students to be those creative communicators. So, I mean, that's the first thing. But the pendulum swings back and forth between like, we have a test, but we have 21st century skills. And when they get out of school, there's going to be no test like that. So, teachers today, we're juggling so much. And it's not to say that, this is how you write a 5-paragraph essay, because, I was a huge, I'll say podcasting has exploded in the past 2-3 years. And there are some unbelievable podcasts that like I just have running on my phone as I'm driving to work and driving home. But before, I'd say like the whole podcast explosion, I was like an NPR podcast junkie.
Oh yeah.
And I was like obsessed with Radiolab, and it was on at like 3:00 on a Friday when I was driving home and I'd get stuck in traffic, and I'd have that time to sit and listen, and I'd listen to it every single week, and it would start to like I was able to just like pull back the layers. Like once you get to the like, this is what it's about. We're talking about Lucy, the monkey, the gorilla who lived.
Yes.
But then you start like, wow, look at how he introduced that. Oh, those are transitions that I use with my students with writing. Oh, look at how they set it up. Oh, this is paragraph 1. This is body paragraph 2. This is body. And each body paragraph was like another like element or argument in their topic that I was like, oh my gosh, like I would come home and like literally write out things that they said that I loved that were like great hooks or leads. And then I was like, well, this is a 5-paragraph essay if I ever saw one. And it was like, okay, so you're going to write a 5-paragraph essay, but guess what? We're going to play around with the voice. We're going to play around with the structure, and we're going to record it and make our own Radiolab style podcast. And we're going to add interviews, and we're going to add sound effects to really emphasize our main point. So it is a 5-paragraph essay if anybody really wants to know. When you look at the structure and you take everything away, they have their intro, they have their closing, and then they always have their 3 little arguments to support what they're trying to solve. And that's sort of how I went about it. I just started breaking down things and like, oh, that's what this is. We're just calling it something else. So it's like when I say I've gamified my entire my English class, or where my students are doing a dystopian unit and they have different missions to follow. It's like, okay, well, I'm still doing the same stuff you're doing, but I just put a whole story to it, and I'm making my students do all these challenges, and they get a few badges here and there and accumulate lots of points.
Yes.
And then they get powers and privileges. Oh my God, it's gamification. But it's also reading and writing and exploration into dystopian young adult literature.
So I moved away from the classroom from teaching Spanish, and for the past couple of years now, I'm a instructional coach, and specifically I work with technology. And I was really excited as far as within your book that you share tips for teachers on how to make thoughtful decisions when using technology. It's the thing that we talk about all the time, to be sure that it's supporting the learning and not driving it, as you put, as far as inside of your book. Can you share some of those tips with our listeners? Because too often, I think, especially if you live anywhere in social media, the tools will be blasted at you. You know, if you know what I mean, like you're like, oh, you should be using this tool, and that's great, except that you got to start somewhere else before you start actually using the tools to be able to make these things actually happen. So what are some of those tips for our listeners?
Well, I think, the first tip I'm going to take, and I'll reference Monica Burns, who is a great educator, consultant, and author, and her book is Tasks Before Apps. When we're designing something, we're not like, oh, I want to use this, and everything has to be geared around that particular app or platform. It's really about, what are your clear-cut objectives first, or breaking down the whole understanding by design, or designing backwards, and then thinking about where the technology fits in to support and really elevate your teaching. So is it going to help as an adaptive or an assistive technology? Is it going to take my lesson to the next level and, help my students share their writing with other people and a wider, larger audience? But it's not just like I'm using technology for technology's sake. So, we all have our favorite tools, but that doesn't mean every lesson has to have a video response, or throw in a video and answer your questions at the end. But think about how is, by using, I'm going to name drop a few platforms. I don't want to get in trouble. But
no, you're fine.
If we're going to use an Ed Puzzle, are you just using it as a visual worksheet and offering 15 questions? How is that helping your students be critical consumers of knowledge and show their understanding? Oh wow, I threw in that Ed Puzzle and there's 15 questions within a 3-minute video. That's the same as giving your students a reading and 15 multiple choice questions. It's the cool Vicki Davis of Cool Cat Teacher Blog. She calls it the chocolate over broccoli. It's what's your real purpose and objective with the technology, and think about how is it taking your students' learning to the next level.
So in a little bit over a month from now, I believe we're going to see each other in Miami, Florida.
Yes.
And it's going to be beautiful and warm there.
Yes, I hope so.
We're about to get a blizzard here in Minnesota, so I'm just yeah. So I'm going to look forward to that January Florida weather. What are you presenting on down there at FETC?
So I'm presenting on personalized reading and digital tools that are going to support enhanced reading skills for all students. So a little universal design, a lot of reading and literacy, and what are the ways that we can help all of our students reach excellence.
That's awesome. So if people are interested in connecting with you and they want to be able to find your books, for example, which are amazing,
where can they do that?
Thank you. So you can go to my blog, theteachingfactor.com. You can follow me on Twitter, although I've been taking a little time off of Twitter to put family first.
Yes.
But that's Teaching Factor. And then you can also find my books at the ISTE's, their website, as well as Amazon. So
awesome.
And I share a lot of other things on my blog.
Absolutely. And actually, your blog is fantastic. I've actually shared it with my wife. Again, she's an English language arts teacher, and she is finding so many awesome resources on just exploring barely kind of going and starting to dig through some of your materials. So thank you so much for sharing all that. Thank you so much for coming onto the show today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll see you soon then, okay?
Sounds like a plan.
Thanks for listening to On Education. My name is Glen Irvin. My co-host is Mike Washburn. On Education is part of the Education Podcast Network. You can listen to this show and many others by great educators like Jennifer Gonzalez, Matt Miller, and many more by visiting edupodcastnetwork.com. Want to get in touch with us? Check out our website at oneducationpodcast.com. You can tweet us at oneducationpod. Mike is at Mr. Washburn on Twitter, and I can be found at Irv Spanish. You can find us on Facebook by visiting facebook.com/oneducationpod. We're also on Instagram at oneducationpod. If you're enjoying the show and think others would too, we would be thrilled if you shared it with them. Please leave us a rating or review in Apple Podcasts or the Google Play Store. When you leave a rating, it gives our rankings a boost. This helps others discover the show. We want to thank our presenting sponsor, Classcraft, for supporting us. Check out classcraft.com/oneducation to learn more about them. Thanks as always for listening, stay awesome, and see you soon.